Summer Community Writers at Chatham University MFA program. I am so excited to hear, it's not a secret, Deesha Philyaw speak tonight. But we do have a kind of custom at Chatham that many of you are aware of. We always ask our students to introduce our guests. So tonight, I am very happy to introduce Laurie Morency, who is a first-year full-res fiction student. Laurie, did I get that right?
Yes.
I hope so. Okay. Who's going to virtually from where are you right now? New Jersey?
Yes.
New Jersey. She's going to introduce our speaker tonight. So thank you so much, Laurie. Take it away.
Yeah. All right. So hello, everyone. It's kind of weird seeing myself on a big screen, but please let me know if you can't hear me clearly. Okay. So I hope you're all doing very well and looking forward to working
Laurie,
with our...
hang on one second.
Yeah.
You can't hear her? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Hang on. Sorry.
No problem.
Joe, I might need your help here. Oh, is it here? Is she muted? No. Is that? No. Hold on. Yep. Yeah, let him in. Laurie, say something.
Hello. Nope. Can you hear me?
Well, I can hear you, but they can't.
Oh, okay.
Hold on. The desktop. It is? Yeah. That's muted?
No, that's now you muted.
Okay. Where do you?
Can you try again, Laurie?
Laurie, try again.
Hello?
Mm-mm. That's it.
Oh, speakers. Try again, Laurie.
Hello?
Not yet. We're gonna get there. Hold on. Someone who knows what to do, come up here right now.
Oh.
Crestron, try that one. Same as system. Try that one. Try again, Laurie.
Hello?
Oh, wait. One more time.
Hello?
That's it. Okay, let these people in. Laurie, give us one more second because we got to let everybody in from the waiting room. I am going to
No problem.
This. Watch me. Okay. Okay, let's try this one more time. For the people who have just joined us, we were again having technical problems, but I'm about to pass this over to Laurie Morency to introduce Deesha Philyaw. Laurie, you can start whenever you like.
Okay. All right. So hello, everyone. I hope you are doing very well and looking forward to working with our lovely guest workshop instructors this summer. I have been given the distinct honor of introducing Deesha Philyaw tonight, whom I had the privilege of meeting over Zoom recently. Meeting her was everything I thought it would be. She was funny, kind, and unapologetically herself. When I was told, as you can imagine, I only have 5 to 7 minutes to talk about her tonight, I immediately thought to myself, well, how am I supposed to condense all of her wonderful accomplishments in such a short amount of time? Well, I'll try my best. Deesha Philyaw is a Black fiction writer and essayist. She was born in Jacksonville, Florida, where she was raised by her grandmother and single mother. She moved to Pittsburgh in 1997, where she currently lives with her 2 daughters. She is a first-generation college graduate from Yale University and Manhattanville College. Philyaw received her bachelor's degree in economics from Yale in 1993 and her master's degree in teaching from Manhattanville College in 1995. Deesha Philyaw is the author of Co-Parenting 101, Helping Your Kids Thrive in 2 Households After Divorce in 2013, which focuses on themes of parenting and divorce and was co-written with her ex-husband, Michael D. Thomas. Most recently, she is the author of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, a short story collection published with the University of West Virginia Press in 2020, which focuses on themes of race and gender and set against the backdrop of the Black church. As the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette recently noted, in The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, the Black women refuse to be subservient to men or obedient to any God made in man's image. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies has won numerous awards, such as the 2021 Faulkner Award for Fiction, the 2020 and 2021 Story Prize, and the 2020 LA Times Book Prize, the Art Seidenbaum Award for the first fiction. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies was also a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award for Fiction. The biggest award I know, so that's fantastic. According to the author herself, Deesha Philyaw is also a Kimbilio Fiction Fellow. Kimbilio is a fellowship for communities which are part of the African diaspora. Kimbilio means safe haven in Swahili, and this fellowship provides just that for its recipients. It is committed to developing, empowering, and sustaining Black fiction writers and their stories. Tessa Thompson, a Black actress who has starred in films such as Men in Black, International, Creed 1 and 2, and Thor Ragnarok, with the Chris Hemsworth, emailed Deesha Philyaw to say how the book resonated with her. Thompson stated in an LA Times article published in April 2021, "We, Black women, are not monolith, and in Deesha's hands, these women are allowed their untamed humanity. Church Ladies is being adapted into an HBO Max television show, with Thompson serving as the executive producer." In the same article, Philyaw talks about how growing up, she did not understand the need for stories written about Black women by Black women. She did not make this realization until she was on a 20-hour train ride from Jacksonville, Florida to Yale University, where she read Malcolm X's autobiography. Having grown up in an all-Black neighborhood raised by Black people, she was not, as she put it, in tune with the struggle. Malcolm's autobiography changed her, and she now understood that what we, Black people, were fighting for was our wholeness and our very souls. Deesha Philyaw says that we should love Black people and not see them as competition. Concerning The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, she said, "If Black women loved it, I did a good job. There's going to be a time when people are not going to be excited about reading work by Black women. I am still going to be writing about them." She received many rejections for The Secret Lives of Church Ladies from publishing houses because they did not see it as a good fit for their company. After all, it is unapologetically talking about specific aspects of the Black female experience with church and God. In an article in Slate.com, Philyaw said she hopes talking about her rejections can encourage young Black writers who are struggling to get published and to push the publishing world to invest in Black stories. To close, I want to say that I have never read anything like The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. I enjoyed how honest, funny, and heartwarming it was, to the point that I had to remind myself, this is a work of fiction and not nonfiction. The characters felt so real to me, as if I were talking to my own family members. These are working class women struggling to find their place in the world. They are raw and resilient. And as a Black fiction writer myself, I resonated with Deesha Philyaw's work because I strive to create characters that are just as authentic as she is. Thank you, and please give Deesha Philyaw a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Laurie. What you can't see is that I'm crying right now. So. Thank you so much. I got one. Thank you. Okay. Do you want me to start or do you want me to wait? Okay. Thank you for such a kind and warm introduction. And for just for connecting with my work that way. And thank you, Sheila, for inviting me for a third year to be here, the first time in such a full capacity. Knowing the talent and passion that's represented in this room right now and in the Chatham MFA program as a whole, historically, it's a tremendous honor to be speaking to you all right now about our writing futures. And again, for people who can't see, I'm wearing a shirt that says there are Black people in the future. And I'm going to talk about that. Also, I'm going to mention a lot of writers, a number of books and articles, and feel free if you want to take notes, but I'm going to provide Joe with a reference list. So if you wanted to follow up on anything later, you can. Okay. Yes, sure. Okay. Okay, sorry, no problem. Okay.
We think we know what we're doing. Thank you, Zoom people, for your patience.
Nope.
There's the ceiling. Okay. Okay, we are on screen. That's as far as it goes. No, it goes pretty far.
Okay, zoom in on
I think we have it. Zoom people, can you hear us? Can you see? Fantastic. Okay, we're out of here.
Okay. Writer and filmmaker Tony K. Bambara said, "As a culture worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make revolution irresistible." James Baldwin shared a similar call. Artists are here to disturb the peace. With the world on fire, seemingly for the foreseeable future, what narratives will we write? The narratives within our prose and poetry, our fiction and nonfiction, the narratives of our personal lives, and of course, our contributions to the broader stories that are shaping the cultural, social, and political moment. All these narratives have the power to affect change. That said, it's entirely possible to write a game changer of a narrative and have no idea that's what you're doing. Like a lot of writers, I was warned by my agent and other publishing veterans that short story collections are hard sells. So many readers' glowing comments about my book start with, "I never read short stories, but," or "I don't like short stories, but." In fact, agents, editors, and publishers, if you pitch them a short story collection, will say outright, "Short stories don't sell. Do you have a novel?" I didn't have a novel. I also didn't have a big name or a big platform. I didn't come out of a prestigious MFA program or any MFA program for that matter. I didn't have any connections in the New York publishing scene. My previous book, as Laurie said, was about co-parenting, co-authored with my ex-husband. That book earned back its advance, but that's not saying much because the advance was quite small. But still, I'm very proud of that book, but it didn't do numbers, as the kids say. So my prior publishing track record didn't help me when it came time to pitch my collection. But when I did land a book deal, it was with a small press, a university press. And again, while I'm quite proud to have been published by West Virginia University Press, those are not the kind of bona fides that suggest that a book will garner multiple awards and critical acclaim, but here we are. And I share that to encourage all of you to remain open to the possibilities for your work, despite what you might hear about industry norms, and what's typical. It shouldn't be considered revolutionary or radical for a Black woman to write stories that center Black women and have those stories capture the kind of acclaim that my book has, but it is. I'm certainly not the first to write about Black women's intimate lives. I follow in the brilliant footsteps of Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Tony K. Bambara, Gloria Naylor, Gail Jones, J. California Cooper, and countless others whose names you likely wouldn't recognize because their work didn't get the attention and awards, despite being just as deserving. But I'm heartened by books that have been or will be published since mine has come out. Oops, scrolled up too much. Scroll down like 5 pages, just 1 second. But I'm heartened by books that have been or will be published since mine, including Destiny Birdsong's Nobody's Magic, a novel composed of 3 connected short stories, Honoré Fanon Jeffers' epic novel, The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, Lola Akinmade Ackerstrom's novel, In Every Mirror She's Black, Sherry Jones's How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, Basi Ikpe's memoir, I'm Telling the Truth, But I'm Lying, and Kalisa Ray's poetry collection, Ghost in a Black Girl's Throat. But it's not just radical for us to tell our own stories. Apparently, it's radical for us to even want to exist in the future. In 2018, a Pittsburgh-based Black woman artist named Alicia Wormsley created a public art project, a billboard in a gentrified, formerly Black neighborhood that read, "There are Black people in the future." The billboard was removed due to, quote, objections to the content. Objections to the content being that Black people will exist in the future. Here in Pittsburgh, they say the typically quiet racist part out loud. So, what narratives about Black women existing are acceptable? Typically, they are the ones that center the white gaze or a white savior or both, which brings me to one of my favorite axes to grind, The Help, the book and the movie. I lost a friend because of the movie, The Help. The 2011 film, based on a book by the same name, features a young white aspiring journalist who writes a book from the point of view of 2 Black domestic workers she knows in order to expose the racism they endure while working for white families in 1963. When my former friend, a Nigerian British woman, insisted that I must see The Help, I explained that my grandmother and other women in my family had been the help, and that I refused to support yet another white savior narrative that pushed Black characters into the margins of their own stories in order to center and valorize white characters in their quest for self-discovery and advancement. In response, my former friend told me that I and other Black Americans needed to, quote, get over slavery and all that. She added that The Help was a really good story, regardless of who told it, and that it would appeal to me as a writer. Needless to say, that friendship didn't survive the get over slavery comment, but what did remain was this question of whose stories get told and who gets to tell them. In particular, as a Southern-born Black woman in the United States, I consider these questions in the context of race, white supremacy, history, and persistent racial inequities in the publishing industry. People who have been marginalized, oppressed, and erased struggle to get their stories told, fiction and nonfiction. So having outsiders publish works about their lives and cultures compounds their erasure and advances misrepresentations of who they are. The Help, for example, ignored the sexual and physical violence that Black domestic workers faced, sanitizing Black women's experiences for white people's comfort and entertainment. Further, particularly for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, false narratives have been employed for centuries to justify our oppression. If you put forth the story that Black people are bestial workhorses and uncivilized, you can use that story to justify treating us as property and not as human beings. If you tell the story that African descendant women are hypersexual, you can justify raping us with impunity. If you tell the story that we are welfare queens, you can justify decades of social policies that keep us trapped in poverty. Our stories and who tells them matter. Responding to the question of where one draws the line between cultural appropriation and artistic license, Writer Kit Duwal said, "So when people who have lost nothing, people from the dominant culture that has colonized half the world, reigned over an empire, raped, butchered, enslaved, taken language, lands, and people as cargo, when those people say there's no such thing as cultural appropriation and insist that we can do what we want, we need to think again of the impact of taking another story and using it as we want." She continues, "One writer put it this way: do not dip your pen in somebody else's blood." Toni Morrison observed that in our, quote, wholly racialized society, Western or European writers believe or can choose to believe their work is naturally race-free or race transcendent. Whether it is or not is another question. The fact is the problem has not worried them, Morrison continues. They can take it for granted that it is because others are raced, whites are not, or so the conventional wisdom goes. The truth, of course, is that we are all raced. So if we are all raced, but those most privileged racially write as if they aren't, how does that influence whose stories get told and who gets to tell them? What harm is done when white writers bring their ignorance in all senses of the word of race and of themselves as products of a racialized society into their narratives about people who are not white? And more broadly speaking, what, if any, responsibility do writers have when writing about people groups and experiences other than their own? These are some of the questions that come to my mind when I think about Baldwin's call to disturb the peace. For us as writers, I believe it's a conscious decision. Disturbing the peace is a conscious decision to opt out of business as usual. It's a conscious decision to challenge the classist, elitist, exclusionary gatekeeping system that keeps publishing white. It's using our narratives to challenge white supremacists, anti-LGBTQ+, and ableist systems and the mythologies that prop them up. So I'm gonna pause here to make sure we're on the same page. What is white supremacy? I subscribe to a broad definition of white supremacy. It's not just the KKK. White supremacy looks like wielding racism or benefiting from it, even in its subtler forms. If you're white, you have benefited from racism, whether you're aware of it or not. To be clear, benefiting from racism doesn't make you a white supremacist. It means you've benefited from the system of inequities this country was founded upon, systems that have functioned and continue to function like pollution. They are unavoidable. The best any of us can do is actively work to mitigate and dismantle them. In some ways, the so-called casual incarnations of white supremacy are the most insidious. For example, there are myths about superficial factors that make one a serious or, quote, literary writer, or that makes one's writing serious. Your stories can't have clear endings or resolutions. There can be no happy endings. Characters must remain tortured and unloved. Characters cannot enjoy romance for fear of your work being labeled, can we all gasp, genre fiction. You can't write your life or your experiences into your narratives. All of these lies perpetuate gatekeeping. And frankly, white supremacist notions about whose stories are worthy of being told and who gets to tell them. And we were talking today in the workshop that when you hear these rules about what makes something a serious piece of writing or what makes something literary, challenge it, question everything I'm saying to you, and ask yourself, who does it benefit? Because what those dictates do, those mandates do, they keep people out. They don't bring people in. So they're not neutral. So telling your own story on your own terms can be revolutionary and disruptive. That said, I do offer a few cautions. First, read, 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 read. There's nothing more awkward or difficult than telling someone who believes theirs is a groundbreaking coming of age novel project about being a Black biracial woman in America that, sorry, but Danzy Senna wrote that novel in 1998, true story. Which is not to say that these or other themes can't be revisited again and again and again, but we owe it to ourselves and our growth as writers, we owe it to our readers to make sure that we have something fresh and interesting and hopefully revolutionary to say about our subjects. So read intersectionally. Make sure your narratives of disruption don't simultaneously replicate or perpetuate other oppressive systems. For example, if you're writing about gender, consider your narrative through the lenses of race and class. So I read Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique in college in the early 90s in a women's studies class. And I knew that this had been heralded as some kind of groundbreaking feminist work, but I didn't know the details. And turns out Friedan had created the phrase feminine mystique to show the assumptions that women would be fulfilled from their housework, marriage, and sexual lives and children, and that's it. That's all they needed to be fulfilled. And even at 19 years old, I found myself asking, which women? Who's she talking about? Because to me, it read like a white lady was upset that she had to do housework. And so Black women, including my foremothers, have had a very different relationship to work, marriage, and family from the time of slavery forward. And so the obliviousness of Friedan and other second wave feminists and their erasure of the Black and brown women who made it possible for white women to enter the labor force en masse is galling. The flip side of the coin of erasing our stories is something I alluded to earlier, which is appropriating our stories. Writing in Publishers Weekly, Karen DeGroot Carter recalls attending a session at Southern Festival of Books in the early 90s. Excuse me. The session featured a young white male writer whose stories were populated by Black characters. When a person of color in the audience challenged the author's right to write such stories, the gist of his response was this, quote, "Writers seek out and write stories that are compelling. I don't find the white suburban culture I grew up in very compelling, but I'm fascinated by how people of color deal with the challenges they face. So I write stories about characters of color who face such challenges. I'm sorry if that bothers you." Karen goes on to share that the audience member who raised the issue was indeed bothered by this, making, and this is Karen talking, making me realize that I had a lot to learn about the fact that people of color had not only suffered through centuries of abuse at the hands of white people, but had also seen their cultures and stories and histories misrepresented and often mocked through the lens of white cultures. Eventually, Karen says, I would learn that people of color are sick of the fact that many white people continue to put their own spins on the stories of people who are not white. Thank you. So, should authors write only about people whom they resemble? Karen didn't let the question stop her from writing her first novel about people whose marginalization she doesn't share, but she wrote that she hopes that other writers will educate themselves on the topic of appropriation in writing and apply the lessons they learn. We are free to write whatever we want, but part of being a good literary citizen, I believe, is considering the historical, social, and cultural context for our work and the potential we have to perpetuate racism and erasure, regardless of our best intentions. All of us writing and publishing now are part of an industry that has a history of inequity, and we cannot separate our work from that history. A 2020 New York Times op-ed cites a 1950 essay by Zora Neale Hurston titled, "What White Publishers Won't Print." In this essay, Hurston writes that white people, quote, "cannot conceive of Black people outside of racial stereotypes. And because publishers want to sell books, they publish stories that conform to those stereotypes, reinforcing white readers' expectations and appetites." The op-ed goes on to quote, in the present, YA novelist L.L. McKinney, who says, "It's amusing to me when publishers say that they follow the market. They're doing it because of tradition, and the tradition is racism." Consider the question of, should you publish just because you can in the context of the persistent whiteness of the publishing industry? In that same op-ed, they did some research and found that of the 7,124 English language fiction books published between 1950 and 2018, where the author's race is known, 95% were written by non-Hispanic white people who only account for 60% of the population. So that was combining 1950 through 2018. Does anyone want to guess what that percentage was just 2018 alone? No, because I told you earlier, Brian. Any guesses? Yes. Okay, yeah, other guesses? No, okay, it's actually, it went down to 89%. But I shared this to say, you know, give credit where credit is due. You know, publishing is listening, sort of, kind of. But here's why, another reason I want to share it. You can use these data points when folks start making bad faith arguments that it's hard for white people to get published now, just because publishing is starting to right some wrongs. 89% is not a crisis. Again, write what you want to write. But what I personally would like to see more of is white people writing thoughtful, complex, surprising stories about whiteness and white supremacy, fiction, nonfiction, prose, and poetry. One such book is the forthcoming memoir and essays called Dreadful Sorry by Jennifer Nislin. And I want to make pause and make a distinction between this kind of work that, say, Jennifer's doing and white fragility, which is about teaching white people about racism. And what you find in white supremacy reflects the work that Black scholars have been doing all along. And so that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about writing the stories that only white people can write. And I want to note too that the Black scholars who have been doing this kind of work, similar to what Robin DiAngelo did with white fragility, is they've done it for decades without getting the kind of fanfare she got. So what I'm calling for here is work in which the white writer interrogates whiteness in general and their experience as a raced person in particular. One of the things that Jennifer Nislin does so powerfully in her memoir, and this is a lesson for all of us, regardless of our genre or subject matter, is she wrote this book as a means of discovery. When she first talked to me about this book that she was planning, she wasn't sure what she wanted to say, but she just started writing anyway. She just knew that she wanted to write about her past and her family and whiteness. And so it was this process of discovery. She wasn't driven by some profound understanding or epiphany about whiteness or about herself as a racialized person and then start writing. She was driven to explore and driven by a desire to better understand these things. So she wrote in order to understand and in order to discover. And so all of us as writers do well to see ourselves as perpetual learners and gatherers of knowledge, seeking after answers rather than simply offering them. It's the difference between the what of writing, the information we want to impart to readers, and the so what of writers, the ideas we're inviting our readers to mull over, ideas that we ourselves would not otherwise uncover if not for the process of writing, rewriting, and thinking deeply and critically and getting feedback and rewriting some more. I encourage you all to explore what's possible by approaching your writing with a playful spirit. And again, I know that flies in the face of anything you might have been told about what serious writing is, but you can still be a serious writer and play and experiment. This is how you stumble upon the revolutionary, by being messy. This is what drafting is for. Revision is for cleanup. Don't shy away from writing your characters and your own most intimate, secret, interior lives. The specificity of your stories will appeal to some, and the universality of these same stories will have connection points for others. Be prepared, though, to play the long game. So I wrote The Secret Lives of Church Ladies over the course of 5 to 6 years, off and on, but I've been writing for 20 years, and every single day of those 20 years is reflected in my collection. And my friend Honorée Fanone Jeffers, who I mentioned earlier, she recently said it took her 24 years to become an overnight sensation. So remember that you've chosen a field that offers no guarantees. Success in this business is a combination of talent, community, and I want to pause here to emphasize the difference between community and connections. You know, you hear a lot about networking and making connections. That's not the same thing as being a part of a community. So success is a combination of talent, community, hard work, and luck. That's the part that's hard. And finally, I will share the best advice I've ever gotten about writing, revolutionary or otherwise, and it was from a Black woman writer named Deborah Dickerson. I reached out to her early in my career, in my writing career, to ask for advice. And this was a dorky thing that I used to do back then. I would read a book, and if I really fell in love with the book and the writer, I would find their email address and I would email them. And I would tell them that I wanted to be a writer and I'd ask for their advice. And you might be surprised to know that every writer I ever wrote to wrote me back. And I didn't have writing credits. I didn't, you know, I was nobody. So I highly recommend this dorkiness. You just never know. And in Deborah's reply to my email, because I was, you know, I really wanted to get published and it was just eluding me. And she said, stop worrying about getting your writing published and worry about getting better at writing. And that was a gut punch. She hadn't read any of my writing, so it's not like she read it and was like, damn, you need to get better. Just in general, you know, she understood just from my email that my focus was misplaced at that part of my career, that I still had a lot of learning to do. And one of the things she went on to say that why this was important is that that we all need to know our strengths and our weaknesses, know where we still need to stretch and grow as writers, because we're gonna work with editors and editors are not infallible. And Deborah does not mince words. And so she was like, you need to know when to listen to an editor and when to tell them to fuck off. And I just couldn't even imagine that you would ever say such a thing, you know, or you would ever, you know, disagree with an editor. But I have since had experiences where I have disagreed with editors, but I had to become a better writer and therefore a more confident writer to know when to advocate and push back. So after hearing me railing against white supremacy and talking about luck, you might be thinking that writing revolutionary is out of your reach, or you might be tempted to play it safe. And I urge you not to do that. Heed the advice of writer Jamaica Kincaid, whose flash story Girl made me realize that I could write stories about the taboos of Black life. Jamaica Kincaid said, one of the things that young people, and I mean, I'm old, so all people, I think, need to know when they go into writing is that they ought to stop writing these stupid books that please people. They should write as if they might fail at it. To succeed at something mediocre is worse than to fail at something great. So, heeding her words, I say to you, you might well mess up. You might well step in it, as we say. And if or when you do, be accountable, make amends, keep going. Mediocre, powerful, privileged people are allowed to fail up all the time. Why can't we? Why not us? Never stop being willing to fail at something great. Thank you. Questions now? Q&A? Yeah.
Okay, we're going to do a Q&A. I'm going to ask that those of you in this room stand up and project your question, and then maybe, Deesha, you could repeat it into the microphone. And if you are on Zoom and you would like to ask a question, Joe, is this okay? Throw it in the chat, and then we'll call on you when it's your turn. Yes? Or Deesha will, something. How will you do that?
Go to you guys. I'll just go back and forth.
We'll figure it out. Okay. All right. So she's all yours.
Anybody? Bueller? I just dated myself with that reference. Yes. So Julie wants to know when you know how to tell an editor to fuck off. You know, it's a case by case kind of thing, but what I want to caution you all is don't think like you need to have a certain number of years under your belt, or, you know, gosh, you're going to get me going on a tangent, Julie. This is the thing that frustrates me so much about the publishing process and industry, is that we experience so much rejection that when you get an acceptance, you're like, oh, I'm just so happy to be asked to the party. And that it's like a mindset of scarcity. And I'm not blaming anybody who feels that way, because I've felt it too. But that's how the status quo and the inequity continues to play out, because we play scared because we're just so happy to be invited to the ball, you know? And so it's a tough call, but I don't know anybody who's ever regretted standing up for themselves. And if you can believe that if you got that opportunity, you'll get another one. And I can say that that happened for me. Like the first time I pushed back on an editor, it didn't end my career. It was a high profile Disney publication. They were like quietly branded as Disney. It was like a parenting publication that was trying to differentiate itself from like Family Fun and, you know, diapers and all of that, but like smart parent magazine, as opposed, I guess, all the parents who aren't smart. And I had written a number of pieces for them, and they paid well, and I had a great editor. And then that editor left. And I found out later that he left because it was a toxic work environment. And so I was given a new editor, and the topic that I was working on was about race and racism in the adoption and foster care system, in the child welfare system. This was not groundbreaking reporting that I was doing. This is well documented for decades. I was simply introducing the idea to an audience that typically didn't think about these things. It was not something that parenting magazines were covering, which is why the first editor initially said yes. He was really excited about this story. And so I did my due diligence. Dr. Dorothy Roberts is the foremost expert in the world on this subject. She's written a number of books on the topic. I interviewed her. She happened to be in Pittsburgh for a conference. I went to the conference. I attended her keynote. I read her books. And then I did additional research on top of that. I documented everything. And essentially all I was saying was, hey, there are inequities here. And there's some mythologies around this idea of Black children languishing in foster care. There's a reason Black children are underrepresented. And the reason is racism. And boom, 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 it's all documented. Interviewed birth parents, adoptive parents, adult adoptees, transracial adoptees. Like, you know, I did a good job. And the editor came back and said, well, my boss, another editor, feels that, you know, racism is a very serious charge. And so, you know, we really have to support this. And I said, you mean other than the like pages of documentation that I've sent you in my interview with the foremost expert in the world? More than that? And she said, well, you know, she's hoping maybe for a scholar on this subject with more name recognition. She met Cornel West at a cocktail party once, and she thought he was charming. What does he have to say on the subject? So I wrote her back and I said, just to be clear, you pulled a Black scholar out of your ass just now and wanted me to go and interview him. Like, is this exactly what you're saying to me? And then of course, which meant that I was saying she was racist, which, you know, then all hell broke loose. But the postscript to that story is usually, well, we killed the story because I refused to interview Cornel West or anyone else. And that's how, I mean, that one was pretty clear cut. Like, it was like, because you're uncomfortable with me saying something is racist, no matter how well it's documented, like, I'm not gonna go through these contortions. And so typically when you kill a story, in your contract, there's a kill fee, like you get like 25% of whatever they were gonna pay you. I think they were so worried that I was gonna like blast them. They paid me 100% of my fee and never published the story. So I won. So most situations won't be that cut and dry, but I will say this, because of the internet, your stuff lasts forever. And if it's something that you just don't feel right about, don't attach your name to it. I think that's it. If it's something that if you can't rest at night or you're worried that it might hurt someone that you don't intend to hurt, or they're changing your story, because a good editor should make your story tighter and clearer without changing your voice. And not every editor is a good editor. And so I think that's the other thing too. If you don't recognize, like, who wrote this? Like if you see that, you're like, I would never say that, then it's like you can walk away. You should walk away. Joe, anything in the chat? Okay. Anyone else? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Eula was the first story that I wrote, and that's partly why it's the first in the collection, just kind of for sentimental reasons. And I had written, I think, like 2 stories. I think maybe Peach Cobbler was the second one. It was either Peach Cobbler or Not Daniel, but I had written 2. And I was stalled on this novel that I had been working on since 2007. And my agent from the co-parenting book had been waiting for me to write that novel. Because like I said, everybody wants novels. Nobody, really wants anything else. And so I had been reading these stories and at events, and my agent was there. And so she said to me at one point, while you're on hiatus from this novel, maybe you could build a collection around these church lady stories. And I really wasn't thinking of them that way. And I decided to get intentional because I was stuck on this novel. I wasn't sure how to fix it. But what she told me was that if I could get 3 stories published around this theme of Black women, sex, and the Black church, that she could take my partial manuscript out to publishers and pitch it on the strength of a partial. That felt possible. Fixing this novel that I've been fighting with for years didn't feel as possible. So I was like, I can do that. And that's where I got the idea to build the collection. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I have 2 answers to that, and both are, there are people who would not at all agree with me, and that's okay. People have mixed feelings about sensitivity readers. Some people have mixed feelings about even the label sensitivity reader. But the idea is having someone who shares those characters' background, read your work, and give you feedback on them. There are some writers who have had good experiences with that. There's some sensitivity readers who have had good experiences working with writers in that way. I've had people hire me as a sensitivity reader, and I've been really super honest with them. And most people, if they go through the trouble of hiring you, they really want you to be honest because they don't want to do harm and they don't want to embarrass themselves, frankly. So that's one way. And then the other is going to sound like kind of contradictory, which is, I think sometimes when you know that you can't possibly know everything, that helps. I think people get into trouble when they decide oh, I've researched it and so we're good now. Gosh, I think her name is Alexandra Duncan. And she wrote a novel about people of the Gullah Geechee culture. And it was about to be released. And someone on Twitter was saying, wait, this is a culture that systematically has been erased, and their stories and traditions, are at risk for being lost. Are you really the person that wants to tell this story? And she had a main character who was a conjure woman, and she kind of referred to her as like hiding in plain sight. And the question becomes like, well, hiding from whom? Like, whose gaze are we talking about? Like, she's probably not hidden from her own culture and her own people. And what Alexandra Duncan did is what I wish more writers would do, which is say, my bad. Like, she pulled her book and she apologized. And she said, I did my research, but clearly I didn't do enough research to understand what the context was, what the full history of the erasure of this people group. The Gullah Geechee people, their culture is the closest that we still have in this country to Africa. Like, don't mess with that. And it's declining because people are dying. And and there are scholars, there are Gullah Geechee scholars who do this work, who don't get a big book deal and all of those things. And so in her apology, she also amplified the work of other writers who wrote around these topics as well. And so I would say to Renée also, again, as I mentioned, sometimes you might mess up. It happens. And I think I would rather see somebody mess up and handle it like Alexandra Duncan did, rather than to not try at all. And then the final thing I would say as a caution, and I wish I could remember who to credit for this observation, the problem with research. If you think about when you're researching a culture as other, there's certain things, there's nuances of culture that you can't capture. And let's just stick with Black folks. Like, there's so much written about our trauma and our pain and slavery, and less so about our joy. And that's how you can tell somebody who's writing from a place of, I did my research and then now I'm putting it, just plugging it in, because there's certain nuances that research isn't going to tell you about how we speak and how we love and what we eat and all of those things. And so I don't know how one captures that joy, but just understanding that if it's only our traumas or our stereotypes about us, then you haven't done the characters justice. If our joy, if our triumphs, if our full humanity isn't reflected. But that's not to say that we should be saints. My God, you guys know what I'm about to say. Magical Negro, God Save Us from the Magical Negro and Stephen King. Green Mile, The Stand, I could go on and on. We don't want that either. Anyone else? Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, all sorts of things. One is I get bored easily. So I get bored with this, whatever I'm working on. And so I'll just start something else. That's how I deal. People ask about writer's block. That's how I deal with writer's block. If I'm blocked on one thing, I'll just try something else until I feel like going back to the other thing. The other way is that, I just try to pay attention in the world. And so there are just times when I observe something or hear something or something happens to a friend or whatever it is, and I will pivot. If for no other reason than I'll be 50 this year, and if I don't pivot, I won't remember. I will not remember anything. And so I pivot a lot because I'll have this idea. I call myself and I leave myself a voice message. I text myself ideas all the time. And so I constantly have new material. When I sat down to get intentional about the Church Ladies collection, I had dozens of pieces of stories. Sometimes it was a line, sometimes it was just an idea, sometimes it was like 15 pages. It ran the gamut. So I had a ton of material to already choose from. So I would say just being alive in the world, And then I'll do a little sidebar here. People also talk about social media as a huge time sink, and it is, full stop. But I get all my news and gossip from Twitter. And it just, so that's another source of ideas, and something might come through that way. Instructions for Married Christian Husbands, which is a story in my collection, came from like a Facebook, I guess it was a meme. I was down to the last story, and those 10 to 15 pages I told you about, it was a story, starting to be a story about a woman who had serial affairs, and she met this one guy, and I didn't know what was going to happen. Like, are they going to fall for each other? Is the wife going to find out? Like, by the time I got to the end, and it was the last story, I was like, I don't care what happens to any of these people. But I still had to write to my word count, so I knew I needed one more story. So I was mulling over this story about an affair or affairs, and I really didn't think I had anything, fresh or interesting to say. And then I saw on Facebook that these women had made these T-shirts that said, "I heart her husband," and I was like, "That's bold! Like, why would you do that?" And then the wives clapped back, and it was, "But I have his 401k," or so. It was just, but what it got me to thinking was, like, who controls the narratives around affairs, right? And there's this triad, and we literally call the mistresses side chicks. Like, they're literally on the side, they're marginalized in this narrative that involves them. And the man, makes the rules and things like that. And so a very kind of easy trick, if you're stuck, is, again, disrupt a narrative, flip it. So what if the side chick was not on the side? What if she was in the center? What if she told the story? What if she made the rules? What if she made a literal rule book? And I had my story. And so of those 10 to 15 pages, they were not wasted, though, because I needed to do that to get to where I got. And there were 2 paragraphs from those original draft that I really liked. And I pulled them into what became the story, and then built the rest of the story around it. So I will forever champion social media for being a good source, but be careful, because it can, be a time sink too. Yes. Mm-hmm. So it depends. So the question is, how do you handle the fear of sending your work out? Is that, Mia, is that what you're saying? I think it depends on where the fear comes from. Is it fear of rejection? Is it fear of? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think for all of us, something has to happen where we get a sense of urgency about these things. And I'm going to apologize up front that I don't have a better answer for you than this. But for me, it was my mother dying. Like, my mom died when she was 52. And I just remember thinking, none of us have time to waste not doing the things we want to do. And I knew that my mother had not done any of the things really she wanted to do. She would say all the time that the only thing she did right with her life was me. That's, that didn't make me happy. I wanted her to have a full life, a fulfilled life, but she didn't. And I thought, she didn't, my grandmother didn't. So what would I look like playing small, playing scared, holding back? And so if nothing else, like, I do tough things and what people would call bold things because of my mother. And so I don't know what that thing is, but I think that we have that reckoning, or hopefully we'll all have that reckoning, and hopefully it won't be someone dying, but that moment when you realize, like, and this is going to be really morbid, like, you really aren't going to live forever. You get this one life. And especially, you know, if you're in this program, you're so poised to learn and you're surrounded by other creative people, supportive people. So if, I guess the worst that could happen is rejection, and I still don't even think rejection is the worst thing that could happen, but even if that happened, it's not the end of the world, you know, because even rejection or really critical feedback, Toni Morrison said, that's just information. That's just information. And then the only other thing I'll say about that is a lot of times when people have that fear, it literally has nothing to do with the writing. I know that sounds strange, but it goes something like this. If you never send the work out, you can always tell yourself, well, you don't get any confirmation either way, but you can tell yourself that you could be publishing, you know, but you just haven't sent it out yet. And these are the myths that we tell ourselves, and time is just ticking. And so sometimes that's because the writing becomes the one thing that's going to save us, or the one thing that's going to make us feel worthy, or the one thing that when we get that MFA and everybody's looking at us like, you know, no pressure, right? But, you know, I have a number of friends who have MFAs who have never submitted their work anywhere. And that just breaks my heart. And they're wonderful writers. They're afraid. Anyone else? Okay. So I'll start with what I was talking about earlier, community versus connections. And let me just clarify, there's nothing wrong with having connections. It's even better to have community though. And that's people who are actively, proactively looking out for you. They get an agent and it's, let me introduce you to my agent, right? And that was important to me because I stumbled into an agent. In 2002, I moved into a new neighborhood and one of the neighbors had a party and I said, oh, I'm a writer, because I was getting used to saying that. And she said, oh, I know an agent. You want an agent? And I was like, I don't have any books, you know? But then fast forward, like almost a decade later, when I needed an agent, I contacted that neighbor and was like, hey, can you put me in touch with that agent? And that's how I got my agent. And that was, you know, just unheard of. But since that time, my agent has signed at least 5 of my friends, 4 of them who are African-American, all of them are people of color, including Brian. And so in my workshop, we were talking about that kind of camaraderie today, that you want to be a part of a community that when one of you wins, everybody wins. So that when Mia gets an agent, you know that you can go to Mia, but she's also going to recommend you to her agent and you know, agents, you query them and it goes into their inbox and you might hear from them in a couple of months. But what my agent does is I can email her someone's stuff and she will read it much sooner. That makes a world of difference. So, you know, so that's one thing is being a part of a community where people are looking out for you to make that connection. Again, social media. Twitter has a number of pitch chats, and I wish I knew the hashtags, but people can pitch agents right on Twitter. And Angie Thomas, who wrote The Hate You Give, that's how she found her agent, by pitching on Twitter. Then there's, you know, the traditional route, which is going to, you know, looking at the books you read and who are the agents representing authors that you admire and who are writing things that are similar to what you write, and then choosing agents that way. Being strategic, just don't pick random agents. Make sure that they publish the kinds of things that you are writing. Going to conferences, writing conferences often have Ask the Agent panels. That's another way to connect with agents. Brian, am I forgetting anything? and torment me.
Live performance also, like going to do open mics, doing like Deesha asked me to do this like open mic thing. I don't think she told me they were going to do it. It was like a sneak attack. She was like, I have a hole in the show. Please do it. And I was like, and I got up and I really enjoyed performing, like staying. Woman comes up and said, hey, like, can I be your agent? And I was like, wow, that's amazing. But, so yeah,
for folks on the Zoom, Brian was sharing how going to and performing at live events, doing readings, you know, anything that can help you be visible to agents, but also again to writers in the community. You know, people are always building lineups. People want to publish you in anthologies, you know, and then an agent reads an anthology because, you know, Brian Broom is in it and there you are too. And agents do reach out. Danielle Chiotti, our agent, you know, she's active on Twitter, and when she sees, you know, essays being published by so-and-so in the Atlantic or Slate or even on Medium, if it's something where she thinks this person is a great storyteller, she will follow up with them. So being as visible as you can is incredibly helpful. And I've mentioned Honorée Fanone Jeffers a couple of times tonight. One of the reasons she's really special to me is because in 2008, she reached out to me. I don't even know how I got on her radar. And she asked if I would send her a short story because she was publishing in a special issue of this journal called PMS, Poetry, Memoir, and Story for Women. And my fiction had never been published in a national publication. And so I leapt at the chance. And then when I got my contributor copy, there's Edwidge Danticat, Nikki Giovanni, Natasha Trethewey, Elizabeth Alexander, Tayari Jones, all of these writers that, Lucille Clifton, that I had just admired forever. And Honorée just kind of plucked me and said, here you go. So these things can happen, but community, community, community. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Deesha, you're so wonderful. Deesha's fabulous agent is one of my best friends, and I've been texting her during this talk saying, they're talking you up. And normally I bring her here, Danielle, for SCW, but she couldn't join us this summer. However, I have another wonderful agent, Rachel Ekstrom, who is coming later in the week to talk to you about this exact topic. So hurrah. Thank you so much, Laurie, for that gorgeous introduction that you did. And thank you to the Zoom folks for tuning in and being patient with the technology. We'll figure it out in a couple days, probably. And again, thank you so much to Deesha for that really inspiring and hopeful, I think, keynote. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful night. I will see you back here in the morning.